Thank you very much for being here today. It's not often that I get to have a speaker who spoke to all the faculty and staff in this room in our January in-service meeting, and then he spoke to all the students, and then we thought it'd be great to have him speak to the parents. It's a little bit like our goal with the all-school read. You know, the more that you have a common vocabulary and interest among everybody, the better. Incidentally, the book next year is called Endurance, and it's about Shackleton's story in Antarctica. So it's a great book, and obviously a very interesting story. More on that in a future email. Pete Dunlap grew up in the North Carolina area in Winston-Salem, went to Wake Forest. He was a teacher in England for a while, and then came to Nashville to do technology. He wrote this book called The Digital Detangler. What I think we liked most about his presentation is that it was practical and thoughtful, and he didn't make technology the villain, although it certainly is an issue that we're worried about at school and worried about obviously beyond school. But his talk will touch on the range of those topics. And we have allotted less than an hour or so for this talk, including questions, with about as long of talk as there are questions. So please join me in welcoming Pete Dunlap.
Thank you so much, Brad. First, thank you so much to Nan and Brad for having me. I hate a good introduction because now you all expect a lot of me. But we'll go ahead and before I kind of pollute you with my ideas, what I want to know is how you use technology. So I have some pens. You have a piece of paper in front of you, which should have something that looks kind of like this. So 3 things that you're most proud of that you use technology for, and 3 things that you're most ashamed of that you use technology for. So go ahead and write those down before I get started. I'll give you a couple minutes for that. If anybody needs a pen, I'll be wandering. If you would just go ahead and circle the 3 that you do most often. So of those 6 items, which are the 3 you do most often? I see a few of you look finished. Is there anybody willing to share something they're proud of that they do with technology? Just raise your hand. Okay, go ahead. Thank you so much. Anybody else something positive? So a breathing app, you said? In the back? Scheduling, calendar, making appointments? Google Docs, fantastic. I saw somebody over here.
I use it to read more books or listen to books.
Okay, fantastic. Audiobooks. How about the other side, maybe things you're ashamed of? It's usually harder to get volunteers for, believe it or not. Time wasting? Maybe just general time wasting? All the politics. Oh my gosh, yeah, it's a roller coaster. Yep, videos. that autoplay especially? Any other? Did you have one?
Yeah, I have a love-hate relationship with Kindle. It makes it really easy to read books at the same time. It also makes it easy to like revisit books and like waste them.
Okay, yeah, fantastic reading with the Kindle. Okay, so I just want to start off by saying I am not perfect at this. I totally messed this up, and I'm not like preaching from above. And so I wanted to show you a picture of myself, and this is a picture of me, believe it or not, during the worst year of my life up to that point. So this is on Facebook. It's actually still there. This is when I was a teacher, and I just gotten married. We moved to the UK, and I'm drinking with some fellow teachers, and the caption for this image, believe it or not, is "This is what happens when teachers get together and shiz gets hella reels." Okay, so this is the image I was projecting of my life, even though I was sometimes crying. I cried at school. I fantasized about being hit by a car, not to kill me, but just to like break an arm and get me out of school for a few days. Then I did get hit by a car, but not hard enough to do any damage, and it was on the weekend, so I had to go back to school on Monday. So this is the picture of my life, though. So I was definitely using social media in a superficial way. So what are we going to talk about tonight? So what is the big deal with technology, right? Does it matter the way we're using it? And then I want to shed some light on what it's like to be a young person today using technology. After that, we'll talk about ways in which the internet has changed in the past decade or so. And then I'll hope to spend probably 15 minutes or so on practical solutions, real things you can do. I'll explain something called the fundamental attribution error. Beyond that, we'll talk about how to alter your digital environment. And then finally, we'll close by talking about how to empower your children to make good choices around technology. Okay, so I'll go ahead and get started. What's the big deal with technology? So the first way in which we're impacted by the technology we use is time. So we now spend more time on devices than we spend asleep. And this is not for young people, this is the average American. So all of us kind of have this issue. We spend, the average smartphone user, if you own a smartphone, you spend about 43 days per year. So those are 24-hour days, 43 of them, so almost a month and a half, which hopefully you're already sleeping 4 of those months. So this is a pretty large chunk of our time. Something I think is really interesting is that we're spending 2.5 months per year watching television. What did not happen when we got smartphones is we did not stop watching television. So that's kind of interesting. And then, just in case you don't feel horrible about all of this, we spend less than 5 days a year reading. So that's long-form reading, things like picking up a book or a magazine or even a newspaper. And the next thing that's a really big deal is our mental health. So this is especially big for young people, college and high school students today. In 2016, for the first time ever, a survey of incoming freshmen found that more than 50% of them rated their own mental health as below average. So I kind of liken this to going up to a college student and saying, are you okay? And them answering no. And so this is a really big deal. That was in 2016. So by now, more than half of college students are experiencing this kind of mental health situation. We also know that social media actually causes lowered life satisfaction. So that is not sort of, for a while there was a correlation between the two. So, but you could argue maybe people who are sad go on social media, and the sadness is actually causing going on social media. But what they've done is they've actually done experimental studies. There was a 1,000-person study in the University of Copenhagen, and what they did is they actually made some of the students use less technology, less social media, and those students were subsequently happier than the control group. And this has also been replicated by the University of Pennsylvania recently, and there's also longitudinal studies that show that you can predict a dip in mental health if there's an increase in social media time. So this is a really big deal because suicidal teenager hospital admissions have doubled in the last decade. So this is a huge problem for young people today. Also, young people today are spending a full hour every single day of their lives less with their peers than you did, than I did. So they're just spending less time physically together. Also, 40% of Americans, this is not particular to young people, 40% of Americans experience chronic loneliness. And we know from various studies that smartphones tend to diminish your cognitive ability and also your experiences of closeness and trust. And so the way they do these experiments is they'll have you do something, they'll have you do a task, and they put your smartphone on the table, and you're actually worse at thinking, you're worse at solving simple math problems because some amount of your brain is being used up monitoring what's going on with the smartphone. And the same thing for these studies with closeness and trust. What they do is they have two people who don't know each other sit at a table and have a conversation. And they have one smartphone on the desk. And if the smartphone is there, you tend to rate that other person as less trustworthy and subsequently less close with them at the end of the conversation. And I threw this in just because when I spoke to the students and I mentioned Fortnite, there was like a roar, almost like, I don't know, it's like, unless you've been a gladiator, it was like hard to describe what it felt like. So I just thought I would include this slide. So there's a study from Oxford that kind of looked at a lot of studies about video game use, and it recommends that an hour a day or less can actually be healthy. So that can actually have positive benefits for your well-being. And but you really start to see problems at 3 hours a day and above. That tends to be detrimental to your mental health. And so I think what's very important to look at next is what are people doing? So what are young people doing today? And what you see is 27% of young people are spending less than 1 hour over the entire week playing video games. So basically have no problem at all with video games. But 9% of young people are spending more than 5.7 hours every single day. So roughly 10% of them have a very big problem with video games. And so I consider this a really huge deal. I think it's massively underrated in terms of our own mental health, our own well-being, what's going on. Looking at the time we spend with technology is a great way to think through how we can make positive choices. And so now I want to give you a sense of what technology is like for younger people. So rather than like tell you something, I have some quotes from young people. So this one is framing a picture and posting it on social media is not a 5-minute thing. It takes hours of deliberation. And LMR, I don't know if you all are familiar with this, it means like my recent. So you could send it to your friends right after you posted something on social media. Very often what they do is they open up the social media app, they find your post and they click like on it. That gives you a boost in likes and it sends the message to the platform that this must be a really good post, which then gets it out to more people. If it doesn't get a lot of likes, a lot of times what you'll do is take it down because you don't want something unsuccessful kind of affiliated with your brand, so to speak. Here's another quote, and this quote is wild because I have a cousin who's in college right now in South Carolina, and she basically said this exact quote to me over Christmas. But she said, well, somebody else said, if you meet someone new and they ask for your Instagram and you only have 80 followers, they're going to think you're not that popular. But if you have 2,000 followers, they're going to be like you're the most popular person in school. So this is a huge driver for the way you interact online is the number of followers and what people think of you online. And I like to frame this in the sense, you know, a lot of what young people are doing on technology, it tends to be Snapchat is one of the most popular apps, and then Fortnite is the video game. I would even throw television into this, particularly modern television where it's kind of cliffhangers every episode. I think of them as boredom engines, right? These apps are not inherently evil or something. It's not like their brains are falling out while they're using the technology. But what it is incredibly stimulating and incredibly compelling. And so what happens is when Fortnite is so engaging, it tends to make the rest of your life seem boring. And so I think of that as a boredom engine. So it creates this boredom in the rest of your life. And what tends to happen is your time spent on those things expand, and you tend to shrink the time you spend doing other things. So that's the idea of boredom engines. And so lest I paint this picture of, you know, young people as zombies and they don't really know what's going on, they don't know what this is doing to them, I want you to know they're very self-aware. In fact, 57% of people, this just came out probably a month ago, Pew surveyed teens, and they found out that 57% of them are actively trying to spend less time on social media. So it is not something they're unaware of. And 58% of them have actually taken a break from at least one platform. So they are not naive. But this is the kicker I think that's very, very important for you to understand, is their friends are not all riding bicycles in the cul-de-sac, right? You can't just opt out and live normally. So quitting alone is isolation for them. And so that's very, very important for you all to understand as parents. So how did the internet change? So I gave you a little bit of a view of what it's like to be young and using technology. Now I want to talk about how the internet changed in the past decade. And so it's changed for you, but particularly it's also changed for young people. And a lot of us have formed these habit loops, right? So you end up bored for some reason, you're waiting in line, and so you go to your smartphone and you get something interesting. You get a little hit, something interesting, and then you're slightly amused, and then you go back through the loop. You get bored again, and you go back through the loop over and over again. So I want to point out some reasons that we go through these loops. And they're not all like inherently evil, but there are definitely some that are definitely evil. So the first one is novelty, right? This is the premise of all social platforms. Other people are posting interesting things. Like right now, you all are looking at me, so you're totally missing out on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. There's new things happening on all these platforms. And this top one is LinkedIn, and then this bottom one is from Facebook. But I also like to point out they're very into photos. So if you see LinkedIn says photo, and then they have a camera icon. And then down here, Facebook, they have a picture of a photo album. Then they say photo video. Then they show you a picture of yourself in case you've forgotten how good you can look. And then they have an icon of a photo. And then they say photo video at the bottom. Why are they so obsessed with photos? And there's a very good reason for that, which is we process imagery 60,000 times faster than we process text. So sort of in evolutionary time, text is a very, very recent invention. So you cannot resist processing images, and you can resist processing text. And so because of that, they really want you to put images up when you post. This one is really big. How many of you raise your hand if you're familiar with streaking on Snapchat? Okay, this blows my mind. No one knows about streaking. All of the students know about streaking. They all also groaned when I showed this slide. So what streaking is Snapchat keeps track of how many days in a row you've messaged your friend back and forth. And so what this is, so this is from my cousin, and she's had 679 days in a row that she's messaged her friend back. And so that's a pretty impressive number. It was over 900 when we were when I saw her at Christmas, but she assured me she could let it go down to 0. She didn't need it. And that's hilarious because also we were on a cruise last fall, and we went into an area where there was going to be no cell service for more than 24 hours. And I was like, what are you going to do with your Snap streaks? And they're all going to go away. And she was like, not a problem. I gave my friend my password. She's going to log in and keep my streaks alive. So this is huge for young people. It becomes a badge of your friendship. And so the reason this exists is because Snapchat reports to investors what percentage of their users are daily active users. So that means people who log in and use the app every single day. So if you can make almost every one of your users a daily active user, that's very powerful for them, and that's why they do this. The other thing I like to point out is read receipts. So this is another feature of Snapchat, and it shows people, if I send you a message, it shows me whether or not you've read the message. So that triangle there is filled in with blue if you haven't seen it, but it moves that area to white if you've actually read it. And so that creates this whole new psychological game in terms of I saw that you read it. Why haven't you responded? And so it creates an urgency. It also creates another reason to go back into the app to check whether or not people have seen the message you sent them. So that's read receipts. Also, variable reward systems are set up in these apps. Tinder's a great example, maybe not super safe for this talk, so I'll talk about email, right? So when you go into your email account, very often you end up with just tons of boring stuff, things you already knew you were going to get, things that are mildly depressing, things that are mildly interesting. Most of your email is kind of hovers around that boring zone. But every once in a while, you get something awesome. And so that's what you're searching for, and that's why we check our email incessantly, because every once in a while we hit a jackpot, almost like we're using a slot machine. And we end up going back over and over again because of that. This is the last one I want to talk about, non-chronological history augmented feed. If you all come up with a better name for this, please tell me, because it's totally thrown off my slide, feng shui. So what I mean by that is, so non-chronological refers to the way that Facebook in particular does this. What they do is they take your news feed and they don't keep it in chronological order. The reason they do that is because as you scroll down, if you see something you'd seen before and you knew it was chronological, well, you've caught up and you would leave the app, right? But they don't want you to leave the app, so they scramble it so that you never know there might be more stuff below that's interesting. History augmented refers to the way in which they track the things you're doing inside of the app. And so they know exactly which types of things tend to make you excited, which things you're more likely to like, which things you're likely to ignore. And so they take that information and they use it to make the app even better over time. So as you use Facebook more and more, it becomes better and better, and you spend more time in it. So this is the point at which some people are like, I don't know about this, this sounds totally bogus. But I like to point out that you are not the customer with most social platforms. So this is Q2 2017 numbers. Since they're publicly traded companies, they have to report the sources of their revenue. And so you can see 85% of Twitter's income comes directly from advertisers, 88% for Google, and Facebook is 98%. I actually looked up Facebook's in 2018, and it was up to 99%. So almost exclusively advertising driven. And so this is why I say tech giants promised to improve the world. Instead, they changed it. So without a doubt, these companies have fundamentally changed our world. I'm just suggesting that it's not all been positive. So now I want to talk a little bit about practical solutions, because I don't want to just depress you. So I want to explain something called a fundamental attribution error. How many of you have heard of this? It's usually like 2 people. Okay, I saw a couple timid names, timid hands. So the fundamental attribution error, I'll tell you a little story to explain this. When I first moved to Nashville, I knew almost no one, which is not entirely true. I did know my wife's uncle, he lived here, but you can only hang out with him for so long. And then also we have a friend named Emily who lived here. She went to Vanderbilt. And so when we moved here, Emily was so nice. She had a really cool condo. She rented out the rooftop, and she had invited all of her friends over. And the sole purpose of the event was for them to meet us, which is fantastic. So fast forward to the event. If you had done sort of like one of these, I don't know, Jersey Shore kind of confessional booths to like ask people what they really thought about us, I can almost guarantee you they would have said we were timid, shy, maybe standoffish. And then you flash to me, and I don't know how, but I know what they said in the other confessional booth, and I'm like livid. I'm like, that's not me at all. The reason they're saying that is because I don't know anyone, right? Think about the situation. I know 2 people, and they know everyone but 2 people at this party. So of course I'm acting shy. And this illustrates our fundamental attribution error. So this is our tendency to overestimate personality factors in influencing our behaviors, and we tend to minimize or underestimate situational factors. So once you understand this, you'll see it all the time, especially in your workplace. You often tend to talk about other people's behavior based on their personality characteristics. So somebody's late because they're lazy, and then if you describe your own behavior, if you're running late, you can always conjure up situational reasons that you're late, right? As you were loading up the van, someone decided to vomit, those types of things. And so this is a little bit unsettling if you're like me. I think of myself as like, here's Pete doing his Pete thing in situation A. He moves over to situation B and does the same thing. Situation C, I'm the exact same. And that's not exactly the case. But I think it's also really profound if you're trying to change behaviors. So what you can do, rather than try and change your personality, is you can actually create a situation or an environment, circumstances around yourself, such that it's just going to make you more likely to enact behaviors you want to have, or to be the certain type of person you want to be. So with that in mind, I want to talk about how to change your digital environment. So how do you alter your digital environment such that you'll be more productive, less distracted? And I want to talk about your phone first. So what can you do to your phone to make it a more effective tool for you? The first is to have a tools-only home screen. So this means you remove all the apps from the home screen except tools. So nothing that will like alert you or notify you, with the exception of, I mean, you can see messaging and like an alarm clock. I have been distracted by my flashlight, but it usually doesn't last long. That's the tools-only home screen. The next thing is to only allow notifications. If somebody is reaching out to you, if somebody's sending you a message, I think that's worth responding to, that's worth knowing about, potentially even worth being interrupted by. If somebody is tagging a photo of you on a social platform, it's just not important to be interrupted by. If someone's commenting on a comment of a photo you were tagged in, it's definitely not important for you to be interrupted by that. Beyond that, do not disturb. I think it's really important that we put this up on an automatic schedule. So you can see I've set it up so it automatically comes on every night at 9:30, and then it goes off at 6 a.m. And I set it up, I only realized this a few presentations ago, but I left Friday off. I guess I was like, Friday's crazy, whatever. But I really recommend doing this automatically. And there's a couple other great things. This is natively in iOS and on Android. And you can let your favorites through. So if there are certain people, maybe your children, maybe aging parents, you can let them through. And then you can also let people who call you multiple times through. So if it's an emergency, usually you get several calls coming through, you can let them through. So that's a fantastic tool. The next thing I recommend is blocking app access. So not leaving sort of your own discipline up to yourself at the end of a day. This is available natively in iOS and Android now. It didn't used to be when I started giving this talk. And also, a lot of Android users do not have, unless you have the Pixel, usually you're not up to date on the latest Android. And so I recommend on the left an app called App Detox if you're not. And then this on the right side is Screen Time, which was released by iOS. And so you can set limits on how long you can use each individual app. So that's a great way to sort of keep yourself under control. And so now what I want to do is you have this paper in front of you. I think I've skipped over the multitasking activity. We don't have time for that tonight. But there's a phone and laptop kind of cross. And so what I want you to do is I'm going to read off a few things. And I want you to tell me, or sorry, not out loud, by writing underneath, if you use your phone for this or if you use your laptop for this. And this is the most important moment. If you do the activity on both, you write it under both. Okay? So the first one is online shopping. So if you online shop on your phone, list it under there. If you online shop on your laptop, list it under there. I have pens if you need one. Okay, the next one is email. The next one is streaming videos. Surfing the internet is next. Banking, watching TV and movies, creating a document of some kind, chat, so messenger services, something like Slack, something like, I don't know, Skype Messenger, Facebook Messenger. Social media is the next one. Paying bills, and then the calendar is the last one. Okay, and now what I want to do, hold on to that list, and now what I want to do is convince you that the laptop is better than the phone. Okay, so there's two main reasons I say that. The first reason is that your phone is predominantly a media consumption device, right? If you want to watch a video, it's fantastic. If you want to post a very short tweet, or if you want to caption or hashtag a photo and post it online, it's fantastic for those things, or scroll through a news feed. But if you want to do any real work, you almost always come over to a laptop, right? That keyboard just suggests input. Beyond that, your laptop tends to be a lot better behaved in two very important situations. Number one is while you're driving. You almost never have your laptop out, thank goodness. And number two is when you're eating with other people. You almost never have your laptop out, whereas your phone a lot of times comes out. And so now what I want you to do is look at your list, and I would say circle anything that's on both sides, and I would recommend shifting it all to your laptop. So not doing that activity on your phone anymore, just on your laptop. And I would even say, especially things like if you're spending too much time on social media, I recommend shifting all of it over to the laptop. And that way you have a little bit more say in how you use it. And I'll explain that in a little bit. So now that I've started talking about the wonders of laptops, I want to tell you a little bit about how you can alter your laptop. And the first is just if you use Netflix on your laptop, you can turn autoplay off. right? And so this is that feature that begins the next episode. Just go into your account settings, and you have to scroll down, and then you click in the middle there, playback settings. There's a checkbox, and you just uncheck it and click save. So if you watch videos, or if you watch Netflix on your laptop, that will save you 100 hours in the next year. Guaranteed, right? So next I want to talk about Chrome extensions. So these are kind of like widgets or tools that change the way that the browser works, and specifically Chrome for these ones I'm talking about today. If you're trying to do this in a different platform like Safari, with a different browser, Safari, Firefox, one of the other browsers, a lot of times they have their own ecosystems with very, very similar extensions as well. But I'm just going to talk about Chrome because it's the most popular. So the first one I'm a huge fan of because I created it. It's called Scroll Stopper. And so what it does is if you have a LinkedIn problem, right? You go on LinkedIn and you just scroll and scroll and scroll. And it just loads up new stuff all the time. So what you can do is this is a one-click install. All these things are one-click installs. And then now when you go to LinkedIn, you can still have this LinkedIn experience. You still scroll down a little bit. And then pretty quickly, though, you hit the bottom. So it just puts a bottom on all the news feeds. And so this works for Facebook, it works for Instagram, Twitter, several, Pinterest even, a handful of platforms. So that's Scroll Stopper. The next one is called StyleBot, and this one is even more flexible. So what StyleBot does is it allows you to hide certain parts of web pages. So here's YouTube, go to YouTube a lot. And so what you can do is you can open up StyleBot and you can actually just select something you don't like for example, that subscribe button. And you can click Visibility Hide, and then it hides that button. And it will always be gone every time you navigate to YouTube, any YouTube video. And so, especially when I was a teacher, I used this all the time to hide comments on websites. I would use it to hide what's up next on the videos. So this is a really powerful tool to sort of dig in and remove things from sites. Another thing I really highly recommend with it is if you're reading an article and you have trouble getting to the bottom because there's a link and you click on it, especially in the gutters of the pages, like the Kardashians keep doing stuff. And so you'll end up clicking on the link and you get away from the article you were trying to read. So what I'd say is you can actually remove those using StyleBot, right? So you can just click on them and hide visibility. Another great thing I think you should do is if you're reading and you see a link you want to click on, hold down Control on Windows, it's Command on a Mac, and when you click that link, it will open it up in a new tab. So you're definitely going to see that, but it will not switch your focus to that tab. So you're still able to get to the bottom of your article, and then you go over to the next thing that you wanted to read. So that's just a handy tip. Stay focused. We're getting more intense at this point. And what Stay Focused does is it actually sets a limit on how long you can use a certain website. So let's say you have a problem with social media, so you go in and you say, okay, I'm not going to spend as much time, I'm only going to spend 10 minutes a day on LinkedIn. Or you can add as many blocked sites as you want, and you get 10 minutes across these blocked sites. And you can choose and pick however many you want, and so then you block those sites. And so if you go to that site, what happens is very quickly, it kind of shuts you down and says you shouldn't be working, which is pretty brilliant if you ask me. Now, you can also do the reverse. Like, say you only want to allow yourself to go to certain sites. So when I work on my slideshows, I do this so I can only go to the slide site to work on my stuff so I don't get distracted. And then you have to go into the nuclear option tab, and you set how many hours you're going to do that for, to where you can only go to these certain sites that you choose. So that's Stay Focused. And so now we're getting downright draconian. This one, Cold Turkey, this actually installs directly on your laptop. And what it does is it allows you to set up a schedule. That is the only feature that I talk about that costs money. But if you don't want to do it on a schedule, you don't have to pay anything for this. And what you can do is you can set up sites that you're not allowed to go to and sites that you are allowed to go to. So I exclude all sites. And then I have about 13 sites I let myself go to. This is before like 10 or 11 in the morning. And that keeps me from productive at the beginning of my day, which is the part of my day when I'm most intelligent. And so here's me on the slide site. It's working fine. And if I switch and try and go to Google, very quickly it shuts me down, right? And it puts up some Abraham Lincoln quote, which I'm pretty sure he didn't say. But that's cold turkey. That's about as hardcore as it gets. And so now I want to talk about how to empower young people, because it's very difficult for them to navigate and create healthy relationships with technology. So I want to give you a few do's and don'ts, and I decided to, even though these are do's and don'ts, I'm going to start with the don'ts and then go to the do's. So here are my don'ts. So the first is don't use devices as a reward or a punishment or an anesthetic. And so I'm sure you know what I mean, but a lot of times what we do is we end up sort of doing a carrot-stick approach with technology, and I don't think that tends to develop healthy relationships around it. The next one I think is really, really important. Please don't be the power switch on technology. So there are a lot of tools out there. There's a few I'm listing here: Circle, Kirby, NetNanny, Bark, and then these last two, iOS released some more powerful features in their parental controls, and then this last one just got released by Google. It's called Google Family Link, and that allows you to set limits on devices pretty well. And I would say let those things be what turns off the device, as opposed to you kind of pulling the plug every night, because a lot of times those are not fun moments. Also, don't misuse technology yourself. This is really difficult, I know, but a lot of times we ask young people to do things that we don't do. And as long as you can kind of explain it and talk about how you're using technology and how you're making decisions around it, I think it makes it more likely that they're going to as well. Finally, don't allow devices in the bedrooms. This is huge. I mean, if you all looked at the percentage of young people who, I'm trying to remember what it's called. It's a contraction with vamping. I think it's vampiring or whatever, but they call it vamping or something. It's where you just use social media through the night. And this is a big problem in terms of the quality of sleep, which is correlated with everything bad. And so I would say keep the devices out of bedrooms. That's a huge piece of advice I have. And now the do's. So what should you do? So the first is to audit your family technology use. And so there's a great tool out there called Rescue Time that I recommend. It can install on almost any device, and it records what's going on that device. And it's framed as a sort of where your time goes tool. And so it's not really for spying. It's really for everybody in the family looking at how they're using technology for maybe a week. And you look at that and do it as a family so that it's not like you have this problem. Let the data show that. So that's huge. Also, cutting media time in half, that recommendation comes from The Art of Screen Time, which is a great book if you're looking for a really long read about technology and young people. And beyond that, she also recommends talking to your children about the media they're consuming. So this comes out of studies with the Daniel Tiger. This is like a preschool show, and it ostensibly kind of encourages young people through the episodes to be more generous or to share more. And so they did these studies where they're like, well, does the child really absorb this message that I should share, for example? And it turns out that the child does not unless an adult talks about the content of the video with them. So I think it goes a long way to engaging with your children about the content they're consuming. This one I think is just a good mental health thing. Diversifying your friend portfolio. So what I mean by that is, especially when you're growing up, you go through these weird moments, right, where you're just really weird and all your friends think you're really weird and they're right, but it's painful. And so what I would say is if you all have all your friends in this one group, say debate or say chess, whatever it is, right, and you have this one group and all your friends are there, if you have fallout in that setting, that's your whole world. Whereas if you have friends from the soccer team, if you have friends from fencing, whatever else, then it's a little bit easier to find your feet again, socially. Beyond that, scale technology use with age. So as children are growing older, they should be able to handle more and more technology choices on their own and have a little bit more leeway. And then this is the final thing I say, walk and talk. So if you need to have a difficult conversation, walking is a fantastic way to bring something difficult up with someone. It's especially better than sitting across a table from someone, which kind of creates this, what's the word I'm looking for? Starts with a C? Adversarial, okay, it starts with an A. Okay, fantastic. So I want to leave you with a couple thoughts. And then I have plenty of time for questions, I think. Yeah, I do. So the first is that the people you love deserve you showing up for them. They deserve you being mentally present when you're physically present. And I think the best way to do that is to be ruthless with your environment, so whatever it takes, and be compassionate with yourself. You're going to make mistakes. A lot of the tools are kind of designed to have you slip down that slippery slope. But as long as you keep working on that environment, you're going to be successful. So I want to close out by saying like many things at once. So the first thing is, please flip your paper over, and you should have a feedback form, okay? The feedback form is the top like 3/4 of the page, and there's a perforation, and you can actually tear off the bottom. Not right now, it would be very loud. But what I'd like you to do is choose one of these things from this list, or make up your own, but something around the way you use technology, and commit to changing that going forward. And so then you'll tear that off after you've done that, and you'll keep that bottom half. The top half is for me, so I'd love to get your feedback, what you thought of the talk, if you thought it was great, if you thought it was terrible, but please give me some quantitative and qualitative feedback. And if you put your name and email on there, I will email you a link to all these things. I notice some of you are like frantically like taking pictures. Like, that's totally fine, but also like I will send you the links so you don't have to go hunting. The final thing is I am selling books. Nan is helping me sell them in the back. They're $14 plus tax. And that's everything. Oh no, if you know somebody who you think is interested in hearing more about this, I would love you telling them about this. I obviously don't have a massive social media presence because that would be very ironic. But I appreciate your time, and that's it. Are there any questions? We have plenty of time for questions.
How do you talk about scaling technology with age? What age is appropriate for Instagram versus Snapchat?
Oh, geez. Oh, just starting off with a terrible question. Yeah, that's very difficult. I mean, I would say they have an age limit, I think, of 13, that you're not even legally supposed to be on the platform. I would say at least stick with that, and I might even wait longer. I mean, I really think it's about setting limits and making sure that your kids can stick with those limits, right? So if you give them an Instagram account, so let's say when they turn 13, I would scale it back, so start out with 5 minutes a day or something. And then you could scale it up as they show they can use it in healthy ways. But I would say, keeping it pretty limited for at least, until all of their friends are getting on, and then it's kind of difficult to keep maintaining that line. But that's my recommendation. Controls on iOS, they're really powerful. And those go a long way to kind of setting those limits so that you're not constantly hassling your child. Like, I think you've already used your time up. It will set it up so that they can't go beyond that. That's a great way to do it. Yeah.
To show all that, what do you recommend? Do you say, hey, let's get some things together and see how long they can stand it out for?
Yeah, I mean, being organized as parents is huge. There's a movement out of Texas called Wait Till 8th. And so what they're trying to do is get parents not to get their kids smartphones until 8th grade. And what that does is, it helps a lot when you're kind of having that argument with your child and they're like, everybody's on it. If you know that a good percentage of people don't have it or aren't on it, I think that goes a long way. But it's definitely kind of has to be a grassroots thing at this point, or sort of a institution by institution. Yeah, good question though.
Second question, laptop, and so you say, okay, you don't leave your laptop in your bedroom or whatever, but at least my children will do homework in their bedroom with a laptop.
Like, are they doing it like and then falling asleep, or is it like they're doing it for several hours and then they're finished? Oh, it just always is there. That's tricky. I would say there are tools that can kind of close it down at the end of, like at a certain time. Another thing I highly recommend, it's on here, is to put your Wi-Fi on an outlet timer, so it just turns off the Wi-Fi at a certain time. A lot of times that makes it a big difference, right, in terms of making sure your homework's done before the Wi-Fi turns off. That's one other way to approach it. Sure. Any other questions? Yeah, just painting with a very broad brush. Video games tend to be a bigger thing with boys. There's actually a center in Washington State that is like an addiction center, and they used to have boys and girls, but it's mostly video games, and it was almost all boys, and so they now just only accept boys. I think that tends to be the issue there. And then maybe with girls more social media, just because generally speaking, girls tend to be better socialized, and so they're on those platforms a little bit more than guys. But no rule is like perfect, as you know.
The circle and the other shows that been successful for you?
So you're talking about the things that will shut it off, so to speak. Yeah, certainly you can do that on if it's on a smartphone or if it's on something that runs iOS or Android. If you're talking about a console, that's kind of a tricky situation too. You could set up a Wi-Fi timer, or sorry, not a Wi-Fi timer, an outlet timer. But that's, I would say, getting in a habit to where it turns off at a certain time and you're consistent and you hold that line, I think goes a long way. Because you start to just think of it as like, this is how this thing works, is it doesn't go on after this time, versus always having that power struggle, which is so painful, I know. Oh, like how there's not books. So there's definitely evidence that people read differently while they're on a digital device. And I was actually talking to one of the college counselors here, and she was talking about how young people, when she asked them to like research a university, it's very difficult for them to understand what she's meaning, like to really read all the paragraphs on their website, that kind of thing, because they're used to sort of searching for something, and that's how we tend to read. And kind of like, almost like an F pattern. They've done these studies where they track people's eyes as they go on a web page. And you usually kind of go across, and then you go down, and you go across. So, I mean, it's tricky because there are some great aspects to that. But it depends, right? If you're gonna multitask, if you're on a device, then I would say stick with a book, right? But that's a choice that's being made in all kinds of different ways across the country. Depending on the institution. It's definitely something that I think people should be able to have both, one or the other. They should be able to make that choice so that they can stay focused if they need to stay focused, or collaborative if they need to be collaborative. Great question. Any other questions? All right. I heard another.
You said a great quote at the end of it, and I know you're going to say it says, be ruthless with your environment, but be compassionate.
With yourself. Yeah, I mean, you're definitely going to make mistakes around technology. So just keep working on the environment and you'll be in good shape. So thank you all so much for having me. This has been fantastic. Thanks.